What is going on, guys? Welcome to the Wednesday night live stream. Today we have on Tim from Purple Monster Corals, all the way over from the Solomon
Hello.
Islands, which is amazing that you're joining us from, this tiny remote islands way the heck opposite end of the world from me, which is amazing. Thank you so much for
Yeah.
joining me today.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
so how the heck are you? How is life in the Solomon, just for starting?
Life in the Solomons is gorgeous. It's good. It's great weather 10 months out of the year. When it's not great weather, it's cyclones, but that's fun. Happy people, and English is the lingua franca. So it's great.
Oh, that actually makes it real easy.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
so I guess before we get started, okay, so you just got back from a dive trip collecting corals, which we're going to get into in a minute.
Yeah.
But I guess just to kind of start out, how did you end up in the Solomon? How did you end up, doing coral collecting and hunting for these amazing gems in the ocean?
Sure. The shortest story, because I think I could take you could take the full hour, just like, how did I get here? But I was consulting for an importing company. I had
Mm-hmm.
sort of fell into a job. I was working, the fish store circuit, saw that I needed to specialize with corals because there was a absence of that amongst my peers.
Mm-hmm.
And within a year, I was working for the biggest coral specialist importer in Los Angeles. And Los Angeles is kind of the hub for United States, let's say,
Yeah.
the Americas, for corals, and so, or for stuff in the Pacific. And so I was working, I fell into a position of managing that company. And every time we would get corals from the Solomons, it would always be sort of the worst coral we received, which was a
Mm-hmm.
bummer. It made me sad. And so I tell my boss, like, boss, you're losing money. This isn't working. He's like, yeah, I gotta go there. I gotta, smack some heads together, tell him what to do. This, not. And so that was when it divulged that he owned the station. It's like, I get you have to
Wait a
prop
minute.
your station
Yeah.
up, but like you're buying junk. Come on, like by rights, this should be beautiful coral.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. He was very like resigned to what it was. And so after a couple times of me like, kind of complaining, he's like, you're gonna go. And I'm like, I'm wildly unqualified. I am not the right guy. He's like, no, you're the right guy. You're gonna go. And a few months later, I was here in the Solomons, and 24 years old. I loved adventure, and so I'm like, I want to go with the dive team. I think that's where I could be best suited, is go to the source to eliminate the bad coral collection, leave the brown corals in the sea, let them grow, and just collect good coral. That was sort of the first, my first impulse.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was in the Solomons with the dive team underwater, like 4 hours a day, 5 days a week, and loving it. So
Wow, that's awesome. I live by lake, so I'm a bit jealous that you're out diving, basically daily in tropical, amazing waters. I watched some of
yeah,
Jake's old videos, and just the amount of coral there is absolutely amazing.
yeah.
Like how dense and how vast it is crazy.
The way I describe the density here is, it hit me when I had come out with Jake to do sort of coral bloodhounding for him. Like, he had his
Mhm.
camera rig and he's very slow and clunky. And Jake he taught me a lot about diving because he was really methodical and
Mhm.
calm. And I'm like, swimming over here, like, look at this, look at this, look at that, look at that, look at this, look at this. And he's like,
Yeah.
cool it, like you're gonna breathe all your air, and then you have to surface, and I don't have a bloodhound. So I learned to calm down. But um, when I would find a coral that was a gem for him to set up his camera on,
Mhm.
I couldn't find something to anchor myself. Like, I didn't have a reef hook, and I don't
Mhm.
want to, smash a coral with my hand. And it was hard to find placement for my hand that wasn't live coral. It's just coral growing on coral, growing
Yep,
on coral, and that's special. Yeah.
that is awesome. Now, yeah, so crazy. Speaking of the air thing, I remember like years ago when I first started diving, I was in Cuba, and all of a sudden, like, I'm getting low on air, and then the dive guy who dives every single day of his life looks at me, gives me a spare air. We still dive for like another half an hour off his tank. I'm like, holy crap. It is crazy though, like how much once you relax that you can actually just sustain it and be out there for ages. But it's pretty cool.
Yeah. It's something as a business owner now. Like, if
Hmm.
I'm going on an expedition now, legally, throughout most Pacific, you can't use compressors legally. There's a lot of compressor operations, but they're what they are. But legally, you can't use compressors. And
Really?
so when I go out, I've got a limited amount of dive time out in these remote stretches. And so I have to be really, efficient. And so that's been kind of the quest over the last year, is like, stretch my dive time out, because,
Hmm.
underwater is how I make money. And so
Yeah.
to stretch that time out and be efficient, and not, when you see something cool, being like, oh, whoa, 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 that's so cool. Like, keep it calm.
Yeah.
So
Not too
Yeah.
excited. Are you allowed multiple tanks, or is there like, just out of curiosity, why can't you use a compressor to stay longer? Is it just to limit on collection,
Why
or?
can't I compressor? Was it,
Yeah,
if I
because
heard
you
the
said you're
question
not
right?
allowed to use them out
Yeah.
there. So I was just curious.
Yeah, so they're dangerous. What happens is in a business setting, when you are monetizing collection, you're
Hmm.
incentivizing staying under longer. And with a compressor, you can technically stay under as long as you've got fuel.
Yeah.
Keep topping off your compressor. You can stay underwater for 12 hours. You
Yeah.
do that,
Fair.
you get killed. You get bent. So
Okay. Fair.
bottles force you to come up,
Hmm.
reset, get your
Yeah.
service time, service intervals. And so commercially they're banned. Now for your own purposes, you can use a compressor, right? But for
Hmm.
commercial operations, they're banned in most countries,
Okay. That makes
including the
sense.
Solomons. They're officially banned. Yeah. So and for good reason. I mean, people, as a business owner, I could be like, I'm going to sound awful, like, minions, go collect coral for me, and like,
Yeah.
really turn the screws. And that's because they're incentivized to collect corals. They could get, a lot of places do commissions
Hmm.
for, find rare stuff, find deep stuff. And so when you push your divers get hurt. And so it was a sort of governmental level control of just saying you can't drive the screws that hard, which I get. I
That
respect
makes
that.
sense. Yeah, that makes sense.
Mhm.
Now, so speaking of that, do you collect most of your stuff? Is it fairly shallow, or are you going way down there, or is it just a spread of
It
everything?
ranges. So when we were doing a lot of clear water diving, LPS like Chalice, for example, I would see between 45 to 60 feet, typically at the crux, at like the angle crux of where rock would break off from, like the
Hmm.
reef wall would break off from the slope. And I would see it
Yeah.
sort of at that junction between the reef slope and the reef wall.
Hmm.
That's in clear water.
Yeah.
In shallow or in muddy water, in silt sediment laden water, I'll see it right under the surface. Big cylinders big clumps of Parietis cylindrica or isopora. It'll be in between the branches.
Hmm.
So you'll see little spats, little starts going between
Yep.
the branches, and as it gets old and breaks and falls down and makes the slope, that exposes a big, 1 foot diameter chalice colony that's almost arguably too big to collect at that point. But
That's
that can
crazy.
be, snorkeling depth. That can be at,
Hmm.
3 feet, or you're Canadian. You don't like our freedom units at 1 meter, 2 meters.
No, I
So,
actually use feet. That makes more sense to be the meters.
oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, it's a weird blend of the two. I know, we're safe. So, like, if you found, this like couple foot chalice, is that something like, would you normally just like chisel off a little chunk and collect it, or
It
do you
depends.
just?
I've done that.
Yeah.
I've done that and then sort of regretted it. That several foot diameter chalice might have like a 3 inch thick skeleton, right? So because it's ancient, right?
Yep.
And then, now I've got this big, heavy, spiky coral that doesn't like setting on itself. So it's sort of the logistics of bringing it back to boat are a little difficult because it'll damage itself. It's so heavy. Whereas a smaller, say 6 to 8 inch diameter, it'll be not paper thin, but thin, where it's not going to damage itself if you stack a couple in the basket as
Okay.
you're collecting. So the big, heavy, ancient ones, I don't collect anymore. Even if they're good color, I might take something off the rim and leave
Hmm.
behind, but I'm not going to take a big colony. I don't. It doesn't make me. It's like cutting a big tree, like.
That's fair. You feel bad. It's survived so many years. You're like, let's go.
100%. I mean,
Yeah.
if I cut a coral and it doesn't break the way I want it to, and there's like shatters and chips, I'll
Hmm.
do my best to replant those chips. And again, that's taking from my oxygen budget, but
Hmm.
it's the right thing to do. If I'm going
Yeah.
to be here long term, I want a reef to keep collecting from, not one and done it. So
No, 100%. And especially if you know something's amazing, right? You're going to want to go back to it next year, and you'll get some again. So you
yep,
want it to sustain itself and keep
yep.
growing. And so
We
100% makes sense.
collected a coral 2 weeks ago. I collected a coral that went to ACI. It was Acropora. My biological Latin might not be correctness. I think it's Pichnoi, but I'm
Mhm.
hearing Pichnoi. It's Pichonoi. Pichnoi.
Your guess is better than me on that
Anyways,
one.
it's like a fern. It
Huh.
grows two-dimensionally, perfectly laterally. So there's
Yeah.
no upwards growth. Any of there was no radial correlates. It was only axials, and they don't even bend up. They just go out
Huh.
and fuse
Crazy.
together. So it's sort of this weird acropora plate that operates in, the better part of almost perfect 2 dimensions. I've never seen anything like it. It was brown. It's not pretty, but I know that Chris Meckley is a big, Acropora fan. He likes rare
Mhm.
stuff, and that's like that's classic Jake coral, like an
Yeah, that's the
oddball.
Jake. It's just weird things. Doesn't have to be
So
colorful,
I
just
broke,
different.
yeah, just was
Yeah.
weird, and so I collected 3 pieces of that and sent them to Chris. Um, but I left half the colony because
Mhm.
if I'd never seen it before, and so if it's new to science, you need to leave a specimen behind so that I can get a biologist out here to document it, geolocate it, tell the story. It's not, it ended up not being a unique species, but it is rare.
Mhm.
But you leave it behind. It's more.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's slow growing, so I
Mhm.
doubt I'll be collecting off of it in the next year. But at least I know where it is, and I can get more if
So
biology needs it.
if you're, I guess when you find something cool, do you have a GPS? Are you marking it? Like, how do you actually know where to go back to? Because it's,
Yeah. I leave
yeah.
GPS markers. It's hard
Okay.
because the funny thing about like undersea topography, especially a lot of places I'm going are really silty water where you've got 10 to 15 foot visibility.
Yeah.
Um, so it's really hard. Like it takes a lot of time on a reef to sort of have a mental 3D map of the topography because it's a three
Mhm.
dimensional place, right?
Yeah.
And so and also like you could be shoulder to shoulder with me on a reef looking at
Mhm.
something, and there's so much topography, there's so much going on that like you might just not see the coral I'm looking at or be at the right angle to see the coral I'm looking at.
Yeah.
It's really hard. It's hard to show people stuff.
Mhm.
So when you see something, yeah, I leave GPS markers, but like the chance of finding it first try, even off of a GPS marker, is about 50-50.
Yeah.
So
That
yeah.
makes sense. Yeah. It's just, yeah, it's so crazy because like it would be hard to find, especially in the middle of the ocean, right? Like you can't even like GPS it underwater because who knows where you are and where you surface. Like you're like, okay, it was within this couple 100 feet. Like,
Right. From the surface, you might deviate as you're
yeah,
going down. Yeah, absolutely.
exactly. Especially if there's a current or anything else. Like who knows where you're going to end up to a certain extent.
Yeah. Yeah. You do your best. I mean,
That's fair.
little mental memories. A good one was I went to the Marshall Islands. This is be 2010.
Hmm.
And we were setting up coral farms. And one of my first dives, I found a really pretty yellowy toadstool leather with green polyps.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, okay, great. I found a great coral. First dive. I don't even need to, there's going to be tons of it, right? Because
Hmm.
I found it in my first dive. So it's,
Yeah.
mathematically that's got to be common. I never found it again. And I remember when I came up from that dive, sort of triangulating myself, and atolls should be easy because they're giant rings for the most
Yeah.
part. And so, you can sort of get your location from two right angled points in that ring in the lagoon. I
Hmm.
never found that coral again. Like what I needed to do was to set a tie line with a buoy with a balloon, which
Yeah.
I now have. I keep if there's something that like I need to come back to,
Hmm.
it's a spool of yarn essentially
Yeah.
with a flag. It's like a sock that you fill with exhaust air and go to the
Hmm.
surface. So
Yeah.
um, yeah,
Oh, that's
yeah,
pretty
that's what I
cool.
use now.
So
First time I deployed that though, the kids were like, "Oh, what's this?" And they brought it back to the village to be like, "What is this?" I'm like,
dang it. Yeah. They're like, oh, there goes my marker.
mm-hmm.
Oh, crazy. Now, so it is vast. There is a big area. So do you normally, just do exploratory dives, you come back to certain things, or is it, usually a quest or a hunt to find,
If
unique
I
pieces?
could, I would do more exploratory dives. As a business that has to self support,
Hmm.
I sort of have to have some sort of guaranteed return on investment for going out and exploring. I'm
Hmm.
working on some deals to get sort of set exploration budgets
Hmm.
where there's no guarantee I'm going to come back with coral. But that's hard, and that's it's a tough pill to swallow. To be like, okay, like give me this many thousands of dollars with no guarantee of return. That's a
Hmm.
risk, especially being at the fringe of the developed world, right?
Yeah.
Um, it's a lot of people are nervous about that. But so part of my model is just to always be pushing my boundaries. If I've
Hmm.
got agreements with a village, then the first step is to start negotiating with a new village and a new area. And
Hmm.
okay, like you've seen me do good dealings with this guy for 9 years. I go back with one of the villages I work at a lot, 9 years of history.
Nice.
So, go talk to him. We've got a good record. And so, okay, you can come to my, to my village next time. And so we just
Yeah.
slowly, extend our reach. So
That's pretty cool. Then when you're collecting, like, will you take some and put them on your own racks underwater to regrow, or are you going out to the reefs every
yes,
time? Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. And the thing is coral wants to grow where it was native to, where it was already
Hmm.
growing. Like it likes the like the water turbidity. It likes the tidal shifts. It's set. And so you
Yeah.
try to grow in the same area. Also, you've already worked out that village, that
Hmm.
headman of that village, like that you're going to be collecting, that you have a presence there.
Yeah.
Um, it's so the Solomons, one of the coolest thing about the Solomons is the amount of sovereignty that villagers have.
Hmm.
I can get a license that says I can collect in the Solomons, right? And
Yeah.
legally I can export that. That means I can legally export out of the Solomons. But if I go to a village without like well ahead of time agreeing to a price and a term and the times
Yeah.
and details, and they're famously granular for like, let's say you're like, I'm going to cut this tree down. Like, okay, but you don't get access to the fruits. The fruits are mine. Like they're
Yeah.
very granular about, so if I go
Mhm.
on a reef, it'll be like, okay, you get the high tide line to this boundary to this boundary. But if I overswim and I go past someone's boundary, then someone else is going to be like, you got to pay me. So because of that, it's sort of preserved
Mhm.
it's preserved it. It's kept it, because it's hard to deal with for Westerners want to come in and be like, okay, like I'll give you this much per year. I can take the coral
Yeah.
contract signed. See you later. Talk next year, renegotiate next year. Whereas here, it's like every time you go, it's this evolving negotiation, and that
Mhm.
can be maddening at first, but it's how they learned, and it's what's really
Yeah.
kept the place pretty unspoiled.
That kind of makes sense. So I mean, you're out there, buddy-budding with all like the chiefs and all the different villages, and working out deals and building that commodity before you're even collecting corals in the first place.
Way before,
Yeah.
yeah, way before. Yeah, sometimes even as much as a year ahead,
Hmm.
going sitting under a tree. I don't chew beetle nuts, but you bring a bundle of beetle nuts and,
Yeah.
telling stories and, yeah. What it really helps, I'm not the pioneer here. The pioneer is Dave Palmer. He was
Mhm.
here in the early 90s collecting coral. And so, when I can say I worked for him, I have a history. Oh, okay, okay, okay.
Yep.
It really sort of sets minds at ease because he had a good record here. He had almost, I want to say he was at, let's just say for easy numbers, 20 years
Yeah.
of
Oh, huge.
good dealing here. So that goes a long ways.
Really does. Huh. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And then I remember one of the videos I was watching. It was like the one guy had his own reef and he did his own collecting and started like cherry pick all the corals he's building out, like Simon's Reef, I think it was
Yeah.
called.
That was Simon's Reef.
Yeah.
Simon's Reef. Yeah. So he was a
That's
coral
cool.
collector. He would sell coral to Dave over the years. And so
Hmm.
he really developed an eye for good coral. And
Yeah.
so on his own reef, on his own front yard, he basically had like a botanical garden of corals.
That is
Yeah.
awesome. I would totally do that if I
Yeah.
lived
It
out on
helps.
the beach.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It really helps him that his area became declared a marine protected zone.
Hmm.
So essentially it's illegal for even his neighbors to come by and fish. So it
Yeah.
keeps your fish populations good. It means that your herbivorous fish are keeping your algae populations down. I mean, all the right conditions met for where he's at. And now it's actually a pretty popular tourist destination.
Yeah.
Since that video, it's become like a sort of a spot. Like Jake did him a real solid. So yeah,
Made it a destination. So do you
yeah,
do you like would you be able to trade corals with them, or you're like, nope, nothing's, it's all protected now? Or could you be like, okay, I'll trade you this
it's
pretty
all
one for that
protected.
pretty
Yeah,
one?
yeah. So I
Yeah.
can't even take rootstock from his reef, and good for him. So he's in a channel of lots of amazing corals.
Hmm.
That area is sort of storied for good corals. He's just sort of has the what is it, like the Rodeo Drive,
Yeah.
of West Hollywood, Beverly Hills. Like he's the best of the best spot
Hmm.
on that slot. But there's lots of good coral in that area. Yeah.
Huh. That's really cool.
If
So
you don't mind the mangroves and the crocodiles and all of that. Yeah.
I mean, it adds to the adventure, right?
Mhm.
So okay, so there is a bazillions of corals out there. Now in terms of exporting, you're looking for the different stuff, right? You're looking for the extra bright stuff,
Yeah.
the different things. How
Yeah.
is it 1 in 1,000, 1 in 10,000? Like how hard is it to actually find
It's
these
hard to know.
gems?
It's hard to number. So when I'm going over a reef, I pass up easily 500 corals for any coral that I take. I pass up
Hmm.
easily 500.
Yeah.
So that's my baseline. Like so that doesn't mean out of 500 chalices I see. It's just
Yeah.
go over a reef, just all the corals.
Hmm.
So then now looking at let's say chalices, I pass up probably 5 chalices for any chalice I take. If it's average green, and that's really customer demand facing. Like if I
Hmm.
send an average coral to my customer, they're gonna be like, I can get it cheaper here. I can get it cheaper in Indonesia. I'm like, yeah, you can. You
Hmm.
can. It's a lot easier to get a coral in Indonesia. It's the story isn't there, but
Yeah,
unfortunately, the customer base doesn't quite appreciate the difficulty to acquire. It's just
that's
it's
fair
line
enough.
items on a. I guess that's sort of the unfortunate old model
Hmm.
of people in Indonesia, people in Fiji, people low wage people collecting corals and just sending anything, and then even the wholesalers didn't select; they just offered whatever they got, And then it was up to the retail store, the specialist, the coral nerd to sort of go, okay, I'm going to look through the bins and find the diamond in the rough.
Yeah.
When I came here the first time in 2008, it was sort of to bring that experience of hunting for diamonds to the coral divers, sort of specializes there. So in that time, I think a lot of people have queued into it. You know, in that time, the internet became accessible in all of the third world, which is a gorgeous thing. I don't yet have a Starlink, but you know, there's going to be a time where I've got a satellite uplink on my boat, and I can be like, you know, go no go, collect no collect. I can have a wired dive camera and be like, do you want it or not?
No,
leave it or not. Yeah, on each, you know, like tell me, squad, you know, of my 100 viewers or whatever, like how much coral, you know, what's the thumbs up, thumbs down on this one? Who knows where the internet will go? But I mean, it's so accessible now. You couldn't do this okay. So on Jake and I's first time here, I didn't have a smartphone back then. I was too broke. I remember he would upload his phone and piggyback it, and for us just to get an email out, it was difficult. You know, just to send a Facebook Messenger thing, it was difficult, and that was only 9 years ago. You know,
crazy.
In 2008, my first time here, to upload an email was like, it was an endeavor to get a dial-up connection out, to get an email out. There's a fiber optic cable that connects Honiara to Brisbane now. Like there's solid data coming through. We're on a video chat live. That's amazing,
which is awesome.
Yeah,
compared to not even getting an email, you know, not that long ago, which is crazy.
Yeah. So I mean, that's generational shifts of technology in a decade.
Yeah. Now, how on like the local side, I know, has that changed anything for you? Because if you look at like some of the prices in the States, like some of the prices on coral is like absolutely crazy. And when you see, and I know, you know, the collecting price versus, you know, the wholesale to the resale, like there's so many steps and chains and shipping that affect it. But has that changed much on the local side? Are in your experience?
No,
are the chiefs like, hey, this coral's fancy, or is it? Yeah.
Well, to them it was rock until exporters put a value to it. So they literally didn't care. I mean, they understand that healthy coral means healthy fish populations, and they eat fish off the reef, right? So they've sort of put it together that like dead reef, bad fish, bad, you know, less food on the table. That much is clear. I remember when we went out and did the coral training, the coral farming training in Rouse Sound, and don't get me wrong, they already knew how to farm coral. It was really just sort of kickstarting the buying process. But they one of the head man came to me and he's like, okay, like we will respect our coral now. Like now that it has a dollar value, we'll respect it, which is a little disheartening. But you just got to look at like, you know, to you and I, like I remember my first time on first time in the Solomons, first time looking at coral in the Solomons. I'd been in town for a couple of days, finally got on a boat, got out to, you know, go see coral in the wild. And my boatman had the two divers jumped off the boat and were hauling this fiberglass boat up onto shore, just trouncing on a field of Monopora digitata, just stepping all over it, not even trying to not step on it. And I'm like, no, you guys can't do that. You can't do that. Like that, you can't do that. And they're like laughing at me, like, you have no concept. You don't know how fast this stuff grows, you know? And they're like, we've been coming here for 10 years, every day landing a boat here. Can you see where we normally land our boat? Like, can you tell? There's no path. You know, it refills. It's like worrying about stepping on wildflowers in the hills.
Fair.
That's how fast it grows here. So, you know, if you disrespect it, of course, you could, humans trying to hurt nature can hurt nature. But if you're being respectful here, like there's a lot of coral. And so to them, you know, coral's just rock. It's pretty rock. It's colorful rock. It's a building material. You build docks out of it. You can build houses if you're close to shore with it. Crazy. It's not looked at as like, you know, this treasure. You know, it literally has like semi-precious stone per weight value.
Now, is there more of that now that there's a dollar figure with it? And, you know, like if they're making income off it, or is it still just like pretty rock?
As much. Not as much. I mean, only so many people are cued into it. That's partially just due to, you know, you have a lot of people with no access to cash, right? It's a largely subsistence, not even largely, it is a subsistence economy anywhere outside of the city, right? And so if it's been actually sort of a throttling issue of like getting people started in farming and getting people started in like collecting. If you tell them like, I'll pay this much per coral, next week you're going to have 80 people show up with boatloads of dead and dying coral because they don't know how to ferry it.
Yeah.
going like, okay, you pay me now. Like, no, that wasn't the agreement. That wasn't the contract. I know you worked really hard at that. So we've really had to be careful to limit the amount of people we're enrolling,
Mhm.
because if you get too many people started too quickly, you get a whole lot of disappointed people who think I'm a con,
Yeah.
and COVID sort of threw that in our faces, because we got 53 farmers started for coral farming in Morale Sound. And then 2 months later, COVID happened, flights are canceled.
Yeah.
I'm stuck out of the country for 3 years. And
Yeah.
they're like, we did the work. How come you haven't paid us yet? So
Yeah.
it's a thing. Yeah.
Oh, crazy. So with when you were earlier in the stream, you said too when you first started, it was tricky because you weren't getting very good corals out of the Solomons. Was that just because they weren't,
Yeah.
collecting the
Yeah.
gems, or was it because they didn't know how to ship it, or a bit of both?
It was a bit. I think complacency sets in anywhere where the manager is not there, where there's not somebody who is holding everyone accountable in any business, and that's not specific to the Solomons. That's not specific to islands. That's not specific to any industry. It's just if the manager's there, and if the manager's gone for years, it's like, well, we
Hmm.
get payrolls on Friday, we get paid, and
Yeah.
so the quality of the coral went down. Once I showed them, don't collect that, do collect that. If you're gonna
Hmm.
chisel something off the reef, it better have a destination, because like there's nothing worse than running the facility I ran in for Dave at LAX 104th Street was 40,000 gallons of
Yeah.
capacity.
Hmm.
I think. I mean, it was massive. It was
Yeah. That's
30-foot
huge.
long raceways, 4 feet wide. I think we had 20 plus. I mean, it was massive.
Hmm.
And so you have raceways filled with brown coral that's never going to sell. You kind of might as
Yeah.
well throw it in the trash, as horrible as that is from an economic business
Hmm.
standpoint. We're lighting it, we're flowing it, we're giving it water
Yeah.
changes, and no one's going to buy it.
Yeah.
Giant boulders of like brown Paredes, no one wants basketball sized boulders. Like,
Hmm.
not only is the airfare horrible because you're paying per kilo to live animal ship it. So,
Yeah.
sort of refocusing in there wasn't hard. Um, yeah, that end of it wasn't hard. Once they saw that, like, this is going to kill the business, we're not going to have a job next year if this keeps up.
That makes sense.
That changed.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Now,
yeah.
do you have a facility there that you collect stuff to? Do you have your own raceways where you hold everything for a while before you
Mm-hmm.
ship it out? Yeah.
Yeah, so we typically, depending upon the species, if it's LPS, I can hold it for a month, no problem.
Hmm.
SPS Acropora, I don't like to keep it more than a week if I don't have to.
Hmm.
Sometimes flights don't get made for any number of reasons, so we'll hold the coral for another week. But if it has to go a third week, I'll usually put it back on the reef, load it up, go out to the reef we collected it from, drop it, collect
Yep.
more. I wish I could say it's 100% survival, because we're not anchoring, epoxying corals down. It would be nice if we had the time to do that, but
Hmm.
it's tough. Bootstrapping a business means that you're making sacrifices, you're making compromises, I think is the best word. So
Making it work.
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Then with shipping it out, like, is it tricky to get it out of there? Like, is there that many flights? Is it logistically, like, that must have took a bit to get that out to go to the major places?
Yeah, I mean, we're making calls with brokers, you're making international agreements between
Hmm.
countries that don't always get along. Fiji and Solomons have a sort of kid brother relationship where they're culturally they're the same. They have similar languages. There's a lot of things that are similar, but there's a lot of like, why should I help you? Like, I don't want to share with you. And so getting live animals, getting the agreements, that essentially code share agreements, even though they're code share partners, and for tourism reasons they'll get along. But like for cargo live animals, sometimes it's just like, no, we don't want to do that. Like, but you agreed to, you said you would. And so negotiating that has been difficult from a business standpoint, the live cargo aspect of it.
Hmm.
Then you have to interlay that all coral is a live animal. All coral is an
Yep.
endangered species technically.
Hmm.
So the international agreements for CITES are strict and are, I don't say arduous isn't the word. I'm happy to comply to them, but they're very specific. And
Yep.
so you have to make sure that you're following those. And so we have to get the ministry that takes care of that is the environment. So Ministry of Environment has to have their paperwork, like all their I's dotted and all their T's crossed. If there's a mistake, and we've had them, there's a typo mistake that could literally kill an entire shipment. Like, it can land in LA and Fish and Wildlife can say, nope, send it back to the Solomons, which is a death sentence. because you didn't fill the right box, or you didn't stamp the right stamp, or you didn't, check the right thing. Even though like everything was done with the right
Yeah.
intentions, it was just a typo.
It's
So
sad. It's sad
CITES
in
have
a
to be perfect.
way that studies protect it, but that's basically, yeah, like you said, a death sentence. That
Correct.
they're like,
Yeah, it's done out of the interest of protecting the animal, which I agree with. It's just to get
mhm,
all of these departments, to get the airline cargo department, the Ministry of Environment that issues the CITES, to get the Ministry of Fisheries that deals with the taxation side, then to get customs. All four of those departments have to be satisfied for a flight to take off. And
yep.
learning how to massage all of those egos and all of that paperwork, that's its
Mhm.
own art. That's
Oh yeah.
beyond the coral collection. Like, you can be the world's best coral collector, but if you can't handle that,
Hmm.
you've got no business. So yeah,
Sounds like the biggest headache of it all is all the logistics side. Yep.
it was hard for me. I'm a tactile guy. Like, give me a spark wrench and a blowtorch. I can fix something, right? Like,
Hmm.
I can weld it together. I can make it run. Give me a hammer. I'll hit it in the right places and get the engine
Yep.
start, right? But paperwork, office stuff, oof, that's hard for me. I was not that, not that student.
Mhm.
And so I had to learn to do it. You just have to sort of put your big boy pants on and you know
Just figure
figure
it
it
out.
out. Otherwise,
Yep.
otherwise go home. Yeah,
Yeah, that's
yeah.
fair. So how often are you actually out there hunting and collecting? Are you out there, daily? Is it, leading up to
Not daily.
shipments?
I'd like to get towards daily.
Hmm.
That's the work I enjoy the most. That's the work that I get the most enjoyment out of that, for sure.
Hmm.
It's usually 2 days a week now.
Yep.
And then the other 2 days are logistics, getting materials, getting paperwork lined up, banking,
Hmm.
day in, day out, employee management, HR stuff.
Yep.
So,
That makes sense.
and then export days, it's all hands on deck for an export, because we
Yep.
usually start at 3 in the morning. So,
Yeah, super early. So now when you're going out, are you going back out to, your guaranteed hot spots? Are you exploring much for new stuff?
yeah, like any fisherman, you've got your spots, you've got
Yeah.
your guaranteed success
Hmm.
spots, and then I'm always trying to push the fold. I'm always trying to sort of push the envelope of getting new stuff. The customers are asking for that. We're not, and I'm not trying to be the cheapest coral on the block. I'm not,
Hmm.
and because of that, I need to innovate constantly. If it was just corals by the ton, I would name my company Corals by the Ton. I name my company Purple Monster because it's a
Yeah.
rare, hard, difficult to keep happy.
Yeah.
It's a difficult beast, and because of that, that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for new, and my customers expect that. So
Hmm.
I'm always pushing the envelope, making agreements, getting to new places.
No, that's pretty cool. So speaking of purple monster, super old school coral, is that one that you
Mhm.
normally collect and ship out, or is it?
So it's one that we're farming.
Yeah.
It's rare enough that when I do see it in the wild, it's rare in the wild, and so
Hmm.
I'm not like, oh sweet, let's get $100 for that. It's more like, oh sweet, let's farm that so we have a bigger farm supply,
Yeah.
and then also, you know, anybody who appreciates the genetics of it knows that, like, or at least, like, acts of God are a thing, right? Like, I could have
Hmm.
a farm of it in one secret location, which I've got, but
Hmm.
if that gets upset, then I got to go find another one, which I can't find. And if I sold the one I found, then
Yeah.
I've lost access to that coral. So, sort of bank vaulting it in different areas where I find it, in different regions of different areas and in different
Hmm.
topographies. So, different facings. So if a tidal wave comes through, not a tidal wave, but like, if a cyclone comes through, which are usually monodirectional, it doesn't rip up that farm, and I'm gone. So putting it in
Yeah.
different islands, different places. So I've not yet exported a wild purple monster since 2015, when
Hmm.
Jake and I came out and we found some. And so we sent a couple pieces out. And this is sort of where we learned the lesson. Let's say that we found enough to send 50 colonies worth. We only sent about 15 colonies
Yeah.
back to Unique Corals, or maybe it was like 10, thinking like, okay, there's 40 bank vaulted. I know exactly where it is. When Jake went back there in 2019, after the Simon's Reef,
Yeah.
he continued on to that reef. It was gone. Cyclone ripped
Really?
it up. It was gone.
Jeez.
Yeah. Yep, it was gone. Now, since then, it's been found again on that
Hmm.
island, but not on that reef.
Hmm.
So it's you can't keep all your eggs in one basket, is the old euphemism.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that makes
yeah.
sense.
So that specific coral, I have not shipped wild in 9 years. I've shipped some farm corals. I think last week, I believe we shipped
Hmm.
some farm corals, but not wild.
Yeah.
Yeah, by choice.
Makes sense. Now, when you're diving, do you ever go down with UV lights and kind of like see the corals fluoresce? I remember one time, I did a night dive
Yeah.
with UV lights. And it was freaking so cool seeing, like the glowing all over the place. But I always wonder
Yeah.
when you're collecting, right? It's bright, but you don't really know what it looks like under like aquarium lights.
Yeah. I think, well, so now part of the training is I've got a pretty good eye for what it's going to turn into. And,
Mm.
a lime yellow coral at depth or golden yellow coral is going to be just green at the surface.
Yeah.
Like that's something I've learned. But one of the, like I had actually a pair of goggles that had hard lenses you could drop in, like an orange filter that you'd swim with, or you could drop in when you wanted to swim. It was really easy to just drop it in, drop it out.
Mm.
And then Jake had sent me a sort of like a third rate, blue light that we were using. It eats batteries for breakfast. I get about 2 minutes of bottom time with batteries, but we tried that.
Yeah.
It was unfortunately, it's just one extra thing to sort of manage, or two extra things between the lenses and the light. He had a really sweet, like wrist mounted dive light that he was using for photography. Unfortunately, those are like $2,000 for the light. And that's, yeah. I forget the manufacturer. It's beautiful. It works beautifully. You can adjust which LEDs are on at any point, so you could really tune your spectrum for depth. I'm not doing photography.
Yeah,
I'm doing
crazy.
collection. And so it's not practical, but I would love to get to the point where, I'm just going down and just looking, but I'm not there yet. Yeah.
No, that's fair. That's pretty cool. I just remember the one time I did a night dive with the UV light. I thought it was the coolest thing ever, just seeing it. It was just a whole different experience in the day.
Oh, yeah, the Candyland. Yeah.
I know, right? That's crazy. So with Purple Monster, so you do wholesale to, if someone wanted to buy it through you, is it just through a wholesaler and they have to request it? How would that work?
Yeah, I would direct them to a retail store that buys from a wholesaler.
Mm-hmm.
That's just respecting the business chain, and that's been a sort of like cast in stone thing for the last 20 years. There's a lot of, I'm not trying to throw anyone in the bus. There's a lot of hypocrisy, and there's a lot of loopholes and exemptions to that. Almost all of the major wholesalers have retail outlets. But the first question any new wholesaler asks, and I'm a new business, and so they have the keys in that negotiation, and their first thing is, do you sell to direct to retail? No. No, we sell to wholesalers. We sell to vetted industry veterans who buy from other importers. So yeah, I can't. There's also no way that it's just the nature of a wholesale or an export import business to get into the granularity of it. I can't deal with like somebody who wants one, let's just say a really, 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 they'll pay 10 times as much for an acropora. It still doesn't make sense for me to like generate a CITES, get it to their doorstep. And then if there's an issue, can they handle the loss? A lot of my wholesalers, like if an airline, makes a hiccup and it sits on a tarmac for 4 hours, we can work with that. There's enough sort of money at play to like negotiate that and make it make sense for everybody. But an individual person who wants a coral for their tank, they don't have that cushion, that elasticity. So yeah, it's just the nature of the business. Who knows where we're going to be in 20 years? The industry changes. I didn't think 20 years ago that something like Dr. Foster and Smith would have been a thing where they could, to your door, get a coral from LA or from where they like Minnesota for live aquaria to your door. But that became a thing. So FedExing corals around the country. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. Now, when you ship it, like how long does it usually take until it gets to a wholesaler? Like, is it days or is it over?
Ideally, corals are in bags 23 hours or less. That's my target. Actually. So it's 19 hours from liftoff in Solomon Islands and Honiara to touchdown at LAX on my best route. It's like 30 something on the next best route, but that 19 hours, I mean, that's good. That's shorter than Indonesia. It's shorter than a lot of places. So if I can get my, bagging time to like 4 hours before liftoff, and then it gets there, and then my customer is already at the airport ready for it to land, that really minimizes that time. So yeah, 23 hours is my target.
Yeah, that's pretty solid. That's actually pretty impressive for that. I expected longer, not bad at all.
I've done 50 something, and we had, appreciable DOAs. I'd like to get, I would love to be able to get to where, I pack up and I can say 48 hours from now, 100%, no DOAs will happen. This is what it is. But that's a lot of a lot of moving parts.
So
But we'll get there.
to reduce it, is it more water volume? Is it,
Yeah.
less stuff in a bag, adding carbon to it? Like, what's been kind of the...
So we're doing carbon, we're doing oxygen, we're doing as much water volume as possible. It's tailoring your box sizes. It's getting shorter transit times between flights, picking better flights. It's getting Fish and Wildlife to release things quicker. There's a lot of things. There's a lot of moving parts. You can shave the
little bits here,
shave the numbers down on every side. Exactly.
No,
exactly. If we have a bigger packing team, which means we can pack more coral quicker, that can cut our time in bag. Yeah. But all those things cost,
Yeah.
Bigger bag per coral means less coral per ton per kilo, which means higher overall cost, which scares customers away. Yeah. So everything is a compromise, which means no one's fully happy. Yeah. But we got to keep the corals happy.
No, that makes sense. Jared's asking, what depth are you diving at for these corals? I know you said it's a bit of a mix, but
it depends on turbidity. Yeah, we touched upon that with the chalice, and I hope I didn't veer too much off of it. But back in the day, I was really sitting at 45 to 60 feet. I'm not doing that as much anymore. Deep water acros, I'll go down to 90 sometimes, but again, that's a lot shorter dive time. Now I'm working a lot like the last dive. I don't think I went below 30. It was turbid. It's it's muddy, disgusting, turbid water. It's staph laden, disgusting water. But it was yielding a lot of deeper water corals at shallower water. So because you got to think like the acropora, which normally kind of bulldozes all the other slower growing corals out of the way, it can't hack it at depth. It needs that. It's like a thoroughbred horse. It needs lots of food and lots of oxygen, and so if those are its limiting factors, the more tough corals, the corals that can handle less ideal conditions, tough it out at shallower depth.
Yeah, that kind of makes sense. And then like visibility, turbidity, like again, that's probably going to depend on where you collect from. And I haven't. This is a secondhand story, but I hope you'll humor me. I remember Australian collector telling me how when they're collecting Duncanopsamia, which is a coral that can handle dirty water and imperfect conditions, they said they would usually hit it with their head before they saw it. So that's the conditions Duncanopsamia is happy in. Yeah. Oh, crazy.
Yeah. That was also a guy who told me that as a boat captain, he was required by Northern Territory law to have a pistol on him because there's so many crocodiles in the water to keep to keep the divers safe. So that's some wacky conditions. Yeah.
Oh, no kidding. Yeah. That is crazy. Yeah. I don't even know how you collect on that. You can't see anything. Especially trying to find the gems.
Yes. I mean, I was breaking down a really gorgeous gold frog spawn, and you get a head that you can't wrap your arms around. I could bring that to the boat by itself, but it's not ideal usage of my time underwater. Go back, find the boat, end my dive. And so you start breaking it down into 2, 3, 4 polyp branches, and so you do that, but you're stirring up mud, and so you make a couple breaks, stir up a bunch of mud. Bring fan some clear water in there to get the mud out of there, then go back to work. But a lot of it you're diving by touch. Set my mallet down in mud, stirs up some mud, and I'm operating everything's 6 inches in front of my face, but you just sort of work by touch. So and then you set corals off to the side, set corals off to the side, and then when it clears up, grab them, put them in your bucket, and move on. And sometimes there was even a part in this last dive where I broke some corals down and then just walked away from them. I keep some fluorescent tags on my toolkit. So if I walk away from my tools, I can come back and find them. Yeah. And so I'll sort of do some work, stir up some mud, and then go scout. So I'm not scouting later. Sort of do a perimeter, and then dust is settled. Come back to my equipment, load up my bucket, and move on. So, but diving by touch, it's not fun. No, it's not pleasant.
That does not sound pleasant. Okay, Port Wolf, does he take any collection site data like temp, current, light, etc.? So I guess just because you put corals in different places, and you said, some of them to have backup quality, and sometimes they do well, sometimes they don't. Is there that big of a difference where a coral is going to be happy at, one farm site versus
usual another? Limiting factor is flow and light. Flow and light is my biggest limiting factor. So I'm having to look at where I collect. Again, I'm collecting in weird spots. I'm not collecting in these clear water ideal conditions. And so in a lot of these areas, they're really tide dependent. Like when tide's coming in, they're getting flow from one direction, and the tide comes in the other way, getting flow from the other direction. And it could be cold water in one direction and warm water in the other, or it could get freshwater runoff for certain hours of the day. We do collect data on that. I've Triton tested a lot. What I'm seeing is that for the broad brush, chemistry is the same. It's the seawater is mixed up enough that are hard atoms that you're seeing in ICP testing. How much magnesium, how much manganese, how much cobalt. All those are pretty consistent everywhere we've sampled, clear water, dirty water. Nutrient levels are different, and so that's been an issue of keeping corals really getting enough food. And then if we're storing corals, getting them enough food, pulling seawater. Now, luckily, where we're storing, where my facility is, there's runoff from a beer manufacturer, and so we get yeasty discharge water, and so I can take some of that water for nutrient actually and keep LPS corals happy.
That's funny, but it makes sense.
So what we saw is a huge downside to the location after we built it, of course, and then it was like, no, we can use this, like we can utilize
benefits.
This.
They're hungry. This is like coral food. That's hilarious. That's funny. Hey, it worked out.
Yeah, I will though. Like what I look forward to being able to do is to answer your that call-in question. It's a good question. Is actually start to like data log as we build up a website of like the corals we're offering. I could be like, this is collected at this snapshot nutrient load. Temperature is pretty the same, but I think nutrient is the most variable with where we're collecting.
Huh. That's interesting. It makes sense though. Now, when you find corals that like the higher nutrients, like what are the ones that tend to thrive in it that you wouldn't find somewhere in the low nutrient zone?
So at the surface, I'll see a lot less acropora. The acroporas I do see, it'll be like Aculeus and Speciosa. I'm seeing in the turbid, dirty water. I'm seeing that there more. Also shallow. Isopora and acropora are the major stands. I'll see like house-sized stands of isopora and acropora. And then I think it's isopora is the big acropora relative that forms the big colonies. And then Porites. So big heads of that, where in the clearer water you'll get acropora dominance. Here you get more isopora and acropora, things like that. The big feeders like Cinerinas, chalices, echinophilia, we get big vases, like person-sized vases of Mycedium elephantosus, which is it's not a collectible coral. There's not much demand for it, or even Mycedium robococci. Vase-shaped corals that when their ultimate form is vases, they're in that shape to collect nutrients, to collect all the settling particular organic matter.
Yeah. Well, a lot of those corals too, I think, the size to actually form in the wild is far too big for the average aquarium. So I don't think people would ever fully see that.
Oh yeah. I'm scrolling Turbinaria, although that might now be reclassified as Duncanopsamia. But the scroll coral, yellow scroll coral, I'll see in that area again, vase shape, trying to collect as much nutrient as possible. So and ultimately, not suitable. So a coral that like I took a lot of pride in earlier in my career, 12 years ago, was grafted monopora. I developed a grafted monopora, and I tried to put it in all my tanks. But as I got better at reef keeping, it just took over tanks because it wants to be, bigger than you can reach your arms around, and it'll squish every coral it can to get there. So I stopped putting it in tanks, or where I would put it in tanks, I would put it way lower where I could sort of corral it. So Galaxia, another coral I love, but just not a very good neighbor.
Yeah, it's not the nicest.
We see a lot of Galaxia.
So do you keep a reef tank now? Do you have a
I don't in the Solomon. I did during COVID. So during COVID, I was in the States, and I had a coral tank that I was really proud of. We've had fish. I think the fish are like, I had them probably 10 years ago. Like the mystery wrasse passed away, but the yellow tang, it was a marine beta, a captive bred marine beta that I've had for 10 years. Just sort of like some legacy fish that do really well in that tank. So the corals were all bits and snippets that I'd collected over the years, and that tank's doing great.
That's pretty cool.
But I haven't seen it. I've seen photos, but I haven't seen it in person over a year, which is kind of sad. But I was really proud of that tank. It was the first, when I got into the Triton method, it was the first tank I switched over to Triton and was able to really watch it and was happy with that tank.
Yeah.
So
That was the COVID
A
tank.
couple of it's up in the
Yep.
hills in Hollywood, so
Hmm.
it dealt with like power outages every time there's a rainstorm or a car accident. It would knock out our power line, and so
Yeah.
like scrambling to keep that thing healthy through 3-day power outages, and we managed it. So
Hmm. Yeah,
yeah,
that's good. Hey, it's cool. Still
yeah,
going out there. You're
yeah,
you're in
yeah.
your remote
But yeah,
tank
now
now.
I don't have a reef tank now. One day,
Yep.
I'll likely once I can get some land, I'll likely do like the Simon's Reef. Where I have a little curated garden.
Yep.
And then I was thinking like, even like driving home on the boat, like, do I set up like an outdoor, sunlit outdoor tank,
Yep.
like a outdoor pond, kind of like Julian's saltwater pond?
Yep.
Like I could do it.
It'd be
It's really
cool.
yeah, the only waste is like it's the power to pump the water through because I've got
Yep.
unlimited seawater, right?
Hmm.
So it's a matter of time. I'll get there.
Yep.
I'll get
That's
there. Yeah.
well, get a nice place on the beach and build yourself a big, find some place like an old like decrepit pool and just turn it to a giant saltwater pond.
Right. Right.
Maybe set.
There's not a lot of pools here.
No,
Electricity is 4 times the price that is in the States. And so, yeah, it's the most expensive power in the world. So
oof.
running a pool pump is like, that's a Ferrari,
Yeah,
like
I will come
that's a
visit
car.
one day and find a way to
Yeah.
smuggle on some solar panels for you.
So that's the interesting. So
Yep.
in the legally solar panels have to be fed into the meter. So even if I
Really?
set up solar panels, I have to pay for it at 4 times the kilowatt rate
What?
of the USA. It's goofy. Yeah, it's they're talking about amending it because it's sort of squashing growth at this point.
Yep.
But squashing investment. But
Huh.
as of right now, you legally cannot set up solar panels without paying the kilowatt rate for the power
So,
you produce.
so you can't have an off-grid thing that's just literally hooked up
Not
to your
legally.
pump. That's
Not
crazy.
legally.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So people do it. I don't need the
Yeah.
I don't need to
hassle.
get in trouble for something petty like that.
That's fair. Understandable.
Yeah.
That is crazy. You think
Yeah.
they'd be all over the self-sufficient island power?
We'll get there.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll get there.
All in good time. So on your side from collecting, is there any favorites? Like, is there any corals that you just love? You're excited when you find them?
I have a I love Aquaphora robusta, and so when I see like a gorgeous Aquaphora robusta, like something that's like almost sunburnt pink in the wild, like I love that coral. And when I collect, I like to share my love for it. Unfortunately, I think other people don't love it as much. I really like the sort of spirograph scalemias that we have here. They'll be like red with like blue streaks going through them.
Yeah.
One of the best corals I ever collected was me and Jake. We collected the Magic Musa that he featured. That was a true one of a kind. I've not seen something like it, but that was a morph of Scalemia vietnamitensis. So yeah, our Scalemia vietnamitensis I really like here. They're not super in demand, but I like them. They're really forgiving. I see them in clear water. I see them in muddy water. I see them kind of everywhere here. So it's a pretty common coral in the Solomons. It's just the consumer demand isn't there. So a lot of them get left behind, even if I think they're really pretty. It's like, yeah, they can stay. We've been collecting gorgeous Blastomusa, talking, 4-color Blastomusa, rainbow Blastomusa. People are starting to get into it. I've gotten a little bit of like, they're a little expensive. I'm like, well, people pay hundreds of dollars per polyp for them. So yeah, they're hard to find, they're really hard to find. So that's, I'm going through, I don't want to give the secrets away of where I'm finding, but they're not in conventional places. And it's sort of, you're paying for the opportunity cost of finding guaranteed findings of other corals to get these corals. So yeah, rainbow blastomusas I'm pretty proud of.
Nice.
We've got great Recordias we're getting in pretty good numbers here. Kind of every color of Recordia Yuma, pinks and greens and oranges and blues. So that's a fun one.
Nice.
At first it was Millipora. I was probably the coral I was most proud of here because there was, so many, actually it's on your, right behind your head right now.
Popped it up.
we have gorgeous Millipora here. But I don't have to hunt for it. You know what I mean? Like it's almost, I don't want to poo-poo it, but it's so common. Like gorgeous Millipora is common here. So I guess I'm kind of spoiled with it now. It's just a beautiful coral.
Yeah. Millies are definitely up there on my list. I just love those shaggy polyps on it. It like gives movement to like the sticks, in a weird way.
Yeah, it's sort of like when are you married? I don't know if you're married or not, but one thing in the retail business I always found when we were selling, retail, you're trying to sell a family on buying corals and a fish tank, and you could get the family behind a fish tank. You could get the family behind, husband, wife, kids behind anemones. You can get the family behind seahorses and sea creatures. Once you start to get like LPS, the wife can still be on board with that. But when the husband gets really nerdy and becomes an acro fanatic, the wife is completely not okay with spending money on the reef tank anymore because they're static. They don't move. You're looking at a relatively static, and that's a generalization. It's a sexist generalization, but like in retail selling, I found that to just be sort of a truism, at least in the Los Angeles, retail market. So, once you turn a hobbyist into a stick fanatic, the life cycle of them as a retail customer is you've lit the candle at both ends on them. So. Yeah, LPS is kind of where it's at. It's flowy, and so Millipora still checks the box of being flowy and have movement.
Yeah, I find anyone that's not newer in reef tanks or doesn't know much about reef tanks, they always go straight to the LPS, straight to the flowy. Then all the super hardcore people, for whatever reason, get addicted to the sticks.
Frog spawn is like blows your mind when you first see it. It's this like diaphanous, as like it's translucent, glows. It's just an amazing coral.
Okay, I'm going to hit a couple chat questions. I've been slightly ignoring it for a little bit.
Sure.
Do you ever collect MPS or non-photosynthetic coral out there?
I don't have the customer base for it. I've gotten asked a few times from sort of obscure collectors, but it's not enough to justify the collection for it, which is unfortunate because MPS is awesome. There are like where I'm collecting deep acro, like Locani type corals, I'll see, fluffy carnation corals all over it. We used to export, in 2008, they were collecting a lot of sun polyp out of here, but Fish and Wildlife really turned the screws on if there's more than one color on the rock, that must mean that that's more than one specimen. Therefore, you need to not just count your polyps, but count your colors on each rock. And they would sort of be like, it was a gotcha thing for them for a bit. And so I saw a lot of people getting a lot of trouble for, oh, you were one short, you only counted 157, we counted 158, therefore you're smuggling. And so I've been really hands off on it because it's a cheap coral from a business perspective, and it's not worth the amount of trouble you can get in. Again, I mean, I'm not trying to trash in Fish and Wildlife. They're doing it out of a conservation lens, out of framework. But as a business, I don't need to risk my license over a $6 coral.
Yeah,
it just isn't.
Not worth the hassle. Yeah, no, so true. Do you ever run into really neat animals during collections like feather starfish or nautilus? Is there any really cool, fish creatures?
So feather stars, gorgon, I want to say gorgonian. It's not gorgonian. Crinoids. Crinoids come out at night. So if we're doing like a 5 p.m. collection, there'll be crinoids that are under the coral that just come out and swoop, and it's beautiful. So crinoids are common and awesome. On my last dive, blue spotted stingray, blue spotted stingray, I hadn't seen in a long time. Nice. That was really cool. A couple of Navarcus angels. I'm not a fish guy, so I never have been a fish guy, and so I don't even. They basically don't exist in my brain when I'm looking at corals.
They're just in the way of the coral.
I'm swimming right. Yeah. And that's just to be a coral specialist. You can't be an everything specialist. And so I'm not even looking. But on this last dive, I did it as sort of a training exercise with my diver. And so we were not, we didn't bring a chisel, we didn't bring anything with us. And so it was just like, let's just go for a swim and look at stuff. It was a reef survey. And so, we were able to look at corals and look at fish. And so harems of bicolor angels, a pair of Navarcus angels, rare. I had a fun zebra shark encounter. This is in the Marshalls. I was nerding out on like a column, just this like spike of coral, totally like just focused on like what's 6 inches in front of my face. And then as I'm rounding this column, corner of my eye, there's a big shark, a 10-foot plus shark right, maybe 15 feet away from me. It didn't see me either because it was probably sleeping. And so I spook on it. It spooks on me. And the coral did this like 180 emergency panic mode, get away from me. And it was a massive zebra shark. Like that was a fun encounter with a sea creature. Later on that same dive, I'll try to keep the story short. It was a one-eyed oceanic puffer, like probably 2 feet, 3 feet long, a foot and a half in each dimension boxes. This is a big oceanic puffer, but it was one-eyed. So it didn't see me. Crazy. It's like, it's drifting towards me with its bad eye. So it just doesn't see me. I do like a kind of a 180, come from behind him and sort of like touch its back. It rolls up to see me. And it's like, oh, and it swam off. So that was a fun,
Yep.
sea creature encounter. But I fortunately, unfortunately, because I am a coral collector, coral specialist,
Mhm.
all of my time underwater is in service of collecting coral
Yep.
or collecting broodstock for farms or planting. So I don't get a whole lot of fun dives. I used to in the business setup phase when I wasn't exporting yet, when I didn't have a license, I
Mhm.
would do sort of what do we call them? Mental health day divings.
Yeah.
Like dealing with setting up a business in another country means a lot of sort of DMV level government interactions, which is
Mhm.
tough. And
Yep.
you're dealing with government level interactions in a country that is very steeped in island time. So it's like,
Mhm.
no worries, we'll get to it tomorrow. Oh, come back tomorrow.
Yeah.
Wait for 6 hours, come back tomorrow. And it's like, ah. And so just to keep healthy, I'm like, okay, I'm diving tomorrow. I'm just
Yeah.
going. And so I
Mhm.
would get to go do fun dives. World War II, there's a lot of World War II wreckage here. So
Yep.
get to go dive on World War II wrecks to keep sane.
That's cool.
Now, now I check those boxes while I'm coral diving. So yeah.
No,
But
that's fair.
crinoids, tons of crinoids. Here's a good one. Last dive, relatively shallow water, but too deep for scuba divers to see it, for snorkelers to see it.
Mhm.
Was a Tridacna squamosa, bigger than my outstretched hand. So I
Oh,
think we're
wow.
looking at like 18-inch shell length
Yeah.
squamosa. I mean, it's got to be 25 years old plus.
That's awesome.
Unfortunately, it's very close to a village that would happily devour it. So, I'm not
Mhm.
telling anybody but you guys that I saw. I told no one in the village.
Yep.
So I got to say its days are numbered once they find it, but that's not, it's their right to eat it. They've been eating giant clams for for time immemorial. But I don't let my divers, if you're on the boat with me, you do not kai giant clam. It's
Yeah.
kai is the word for eating here.
Yeah.
You don't eat giant clam. It's off the menu. And they
No,
think it's
that's fair.
hilarious that that's my rule, but no turtle and no giant clam.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Oh, that's crazy. Yeah, I know.
giant.
No, I was
I
gonna
had
say,
one last sea creature memory was
yeah.
a massive. I think it was a hawksbill, massive hawksbill on my deep coral reef, sleeping on like a ledge. So I was coming up from deep, coming up this ledge, and I came up and over, and there was probably a 4 foot shell length. So like head to tail, maybe 5.5, 6 foot
Mhm.
hawksbill. Like maybe that puts into olive green territory, but it was massive. And it was sleeping because it just sleeps on this little bowl that it probably
Yep.
sleeps on every day, because it forms a little bowl on the coral. And it saw me and sped off because unfortunately here in the Solomons they eat turtles.
Yep.
But that was a cool spot. That was a really cool
Huh.
spot. Whereas like if you dive in Hawaii, you're gonna see sea turtles. In the
Yeah.
Solomons, they know they're on the menu. So the second they see a person,
They're gone.
they're gone.
Yeah. That's still
Yeah,
still a cool experience. I almost feel
yeah.
bad for some of the sea creatures. You're like, especially with you're in a reef tanks for so long, you're like, I keep you as a pet. And they're like, breakfast. Yep.
I've over the years, I don't eat reef fish, but my first time here, living with professional divers and learning
Mhm.
the trade, they bring a spear gun down with them. And, we're eating Oriental sweet lips. We're eating, I remember eating a morse idol being like, this is weird. Like,
Yeah.
this is strange that I'm eating a morse idol. Eating, not sohal tangs. We have clown tangs, lineatus tangs, and we
Mhm.
have Nasor unicornis. So
Yep.
eating those, I mean, it's a weird experience
Yeah.
eating fish that I've raised. My,
Yep.
my most ludicrous fish I've eaten was back then as well, but I was in Western Province, ending my trip on sort of a little vacation, a little 1 week long, go see Western Province. And
Mhm.
at the fish market, they had uh, what's the name of it? It's the purple pollini, a pollini grouper.
Mhm.
So like a several hundred US dollar fish that
Yeah.
occurs deep water. They're rare.
Mhm.
That was at the fish market. So someone somehow brought one up from deep, and that was, it's
Crazy.
dead. It's at the fish market, and I'm like, I
Yep.
want that one, and it was like 45 cents US for the fish.
Yeah.
And
Or
then,
be like
so
$400
documented,
for your tank alive.
yeah.
Crazy.
So documented, like, buying it at the fish market,
Yeah.
putting a little grill together, getting some driftwood and barbecuing it on the beach. And then like a local stray dog was like begging for some scraps. So that's one of
Yep.
my favorite photos of my first trip here. Yeah.
Oh, that's crazy. It's neat
Yeah.
experiences. It's always weird, but it's neat experiences for sure.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so mostly work now, so not as much for the fun dives. When you see the wrecks,
Sure.
do they have a lot of coral on them now over the years,
Oh
or is
yeah.
it? Yeah.
Oh yeah. Like, um, the, so the three closest to town are Benegi 1, 2, and 3.
Hmm.
And so there's sort of like three different skill levels of diving. It was three Japanese transport like supply vessels that they sent knowing that the boats were not going to come back. So they were basically suicide mission boats, like ground yourself, run off, unload supplies, because the US, we had taken the island, but the leftover Japanese on the island fighting to keep it
Yeah.
were running out of supplies. And so it was an emergency supply drop from the Japanese side. It's only 10 miles out of town, so within gun range of the base here. So the boats were doomed. So one boat, the nearest boat is at like the back of the boat's at about 100 feet, and the front of it's at like 40 feet. Yep. The next one is shallow. You could snorkel it. So the wreckage is mostly out of water. The next one's at like 150, 200 feet. So it's advanced skill level diving.
Yeah.
On the closest one to town that's at about 100 feet, there's blastomusa all over the side of that boat.
Huh.
I mean, it's awesome. There's pink to orange Cyphastria growing on it. I mean, it's loaded with coral. You can't collect off of it for good reason. I mean, it's a heritage wreck site, but like it's pretty cool to see that. On the
that would be
I-2 submarine, which was another transport submarine, so not a missile submarine that doesn't exist at the time, and not really a torpedo submarine, not a hunter submarine. It was a transport submarine. It was bringing supplies from New Guinea, also here for Japanese, but they could do it underwater. It was stealthy. That got chased and grounded at the end of the island. That's my favorite dive. At about 60 feet, it's got a massive blue squamosa, like blue, like the color of my room, like powder blue squamosa. Gorgeous, beautiful. Gorgeous clam. And again, safe. It's, no one's going to eat that, or at least they should. Really, really, really shouldn't. But yeah. So that's a cool one.
That's freaking awesome. Yeah. Like just seeing like all these wrecks is colored and like, colorful coral. That's
so cool. Steel, coral can grow on steel just fine. And actually like when back in when the big business was here, when Dave's business was here, they were collecting sun polyps, so NPS, off of shipwrecks, off of, commercial fishing shipwrecks. So not World War II stuff. You can collect off that. And to do that, they just bang with a sledgehammer. You just bang the steel, and a giant slab of rust will come off with hundreds of NPS. And so they'll pick them off of that. And so when they would ship them, they'd be in this horrible orange rust colored water. The corals are healthy. They're fine. They don't care about that. But the water would be orange and it would look like death, and they'd be fine. So that's how NPS was shipped, 15 years ago. So.
It's funny. You hear stories now where like, oh, there's rust in my tank. My corals are dying. Meanwhile, they're like living on rust.
Yeah. So it was actually, I had the privilege of working for Triton for a year and a half, Triton USA. Maybe it was more. My math it's off. But yeah, it's it was a long weekend of collecting and not very much sleep. We had chatted before I think we had chatted before that we went live about the bed bugs. So the first night I got no sleep. I'm still catching up. I lost count. I have over 100 bites from that bad night. So I'm a little slow. Sorry, but the collection diving. Oh, so working for Triton. Sorry, lost train of thought. We had a customer who had a hammer get dropped in his big reef tank and dropped in the back in the sump and forgotten about. And he was like, "I'm sure this is the reason for the downfall of my tank." And Isan himself had to sort of explain that, like essentially the things that you don't want that are in the alloys of steel, because steel is alloyed with like vanadium and chromium and things that you don't want in excess. But even though they're in the alloy of the steel and the steel is rusting, the iron is oxidizing and becoming saltwater available. It's becoming slowly dissolving in the tank where the acidity is high, right? So in normal basic seawater conditions, rust is not toxic. It's iron. It's not toxic, even high concentrations. And the stuff that's bad, the chromium, the stuff that's alloyed in the steel, isn't soluble. When it oxidizes, it isn't soluble. So he had to sort of break it down, and because this customer was convinced that was the cause of the downfall of his tank, and it just wasn't. So I learned a lot. So these shipwrecks, I mean, maybe at that concentration, certain things wouldn't be happy, but I mean, I get Acropora growing on these shipwrecks. So
yeah. I mean, you also have
be that bad.
The dilution factor of the ocean versus a small box.
Correct.
So
constant dilution of seawater. Yeah, that's the solution to pollution is dilution.
Yep. So from your, I guess, hobbyist industry perspective on like keeping a tank and corals, has there been any like big epiphany things, or you're like, why did we ever worry about that? It's not an issue. Like, has there been any like big mind shifts on, wild versus aquariums and how people keep corals?
Yeah. So flow, I think in captivity, we don't understand just how much flow these corals get.
Mm-hmm.
And the type of flow. I mean, like you might be able to say, like, yeah, I've got one power head and it moves my tank over 10 times. But like that's a needle of water pointing
Mm-hmm.
from one corner of your tank to the other. It's not the entirety of your tank going this way for
Yeah.
6 hours, right? Gently, not a needle. It's the entirety. And then
Mm-hmm.
going this way for 6 hours and reversing. So like big, gentle water current where like as a, I was a good swimmer in high school as a competitive swimmer. I'm to this day, I swim a lot with dive gear. I have trouble on some of these reefs not getting moved, like
Oh
swimming
yeah.
my tush off, trying to keep position and getting pushed. And, and now you just go with it. Right. But like when I was first here, like, burning oxygen. So, these corals are used to those conditions. You put them in a tank and they're getting only a trickle compared to that. So I think that's one thing. Consistency.
Mm-hmm.
You might be able, if you're only testing every couple of days and you're hitting I've got the right numbers once every couple of days, but you're getting peaks and valleys. Corals need consistency, even if it's not perfect. If it's
Yeah.
consistent, like consistently imperfect, that's better than peaks and valleys.
Up and
I
down.
think that's been an understanding with the constant testing we're getting now.
Mm-hmm.
That the sea just takes for granted. The amount of food that these corals get, we take for granted. These corals get
Yeah.
flushed with larvae every night. And so in the wild, corals are growing exponentially faster than they are in captivity. So even
Mm-hmm.
like your healthiest reef, and I've had it for 10 years and it's great, will look anemic compared to a 2-year-old reef that was planted.
Yeah.
So there was a warm water area in Western Province where we were farming Millipora. If they missed, just because of island time and logistics, if they missed an export window to get their farmed coral out, 6 weeks later, their next window to export, those corals are too big to fit in a bag. We have to
Really?
smash them up, break them into four, and then the shape is weird. Yeah,
Yeah.
this was a reef where it was like this weird inlet where the tide would come in, corals would get fresh water, and then
Mm-hmm.
the reef would just roast for
Yeah.
8 hours. It would get uncomfortably hot, and you would think it's going to bleach. And the corals were sort of peach, sort of like near bleachy color, but they
Mm-hmm.
were cranking. They were ultra high metabolism cranking. And so I remember diving it being uncomfortable in trunks, like not even wearing
Yeah.
a rash guard, being uncomfortably hot on this reef. And those corals, their metabolism was too high. It was problematically high.
Huh.
So
Okay.
yeah, I can
So
get you some. I have some photos of that back in my.
that's
What's
cool.
that?
I was gonna say, okay, so we don't have enough flow. We
Yeah.
probably don't feed our corals enough.
Yeah.
Temperature obviously isn't as big of a
Correct.
deal because there's so much swings out there between the hot and the cold, high tide, low
Well,
tide.
here our corals sit at 81 to 82 degrees constant.
Yeah.
If you do that in your tank, they're done. And that's
Now,
you're balancing.
now that
Can
being
you keep your tank at 80?
well, no, and if I took a Solomon Island coral and threw it in my tank that's used to that, would it be fine in higher temperatures in my tank?
It's so
Or
yes. So that is one thing that we've had to sort of get our people receiving corals to condition them to
mm-hmm.
be ready for that. It was a bit of a learning curve in the first year of why are the corals not happy when they're coming back? And it was it was a lot of things. It was not just temperature, but temperature acclimation is a thing because they're
Yeah.
used to 81 to 82 constant. We've learned to sort of start the process of bringing temperature down by shading the corals so they're not in sunlit, warm tanks.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a thing. To keep them at that temperature now, it's not just temperature because now your oxygen demand is going to go up and
Yeah.
your food demand is going to go up and your KH demand goes up because the metabolism of the corals and their consumption of all of their limiting factors goes up with that. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Raises everything when you do with the temperature. No, makes sense.
Yeah.
All right. More flow, more food, more stable water.
More flow, more food, more everything. Yeah. Yeah. But then with that, you got to get rid of that food. And so more skimming, more, it's hard. More food is tough. More food is tough.
Yeah.
Yeah. More food is really tough.
That's fair. I've been often wondering if we overfilter our tanks now and if that's, taking away
I think
more of
so.
the food from the corals. Yeah.
I think so. I think the sterile, like bare bottom sterile tanks, it's hard. I was able to do it because I had a little sand. I sort of made a Triton compromise by a little sand, and then a big refugium, and I let the muck settle so that there was, worms living in the muck, and you had larvae coming out of that because you need that trickle of constant food. But yeah, we're so good now. I as an aquarist in the late 90s we were told that like nitrate's the devil. We didn't even test phosphate, but nitrate's the devil. And so we were chasing zero nitrate because that was what our testing thresholds were.
Yeah.
Now their testing thresholds are percentage, decimal levels of nitrate or decimal levels of phosphate, which is the real problem. We were trying to chase zero phosphate, which was killing corals. It was starving our corals. So then we started feeding and adding, I don't know if you remember adding stump remover to tanks to try to get your phosphate levels back.
Never done it, but I read a bazillion people doing it.
It's weird going to Home Depot and buying stump remover to add to your tank.
Your pristine overfilled. Or
getting on a watch list because you're buying potassium nitrate to dose your tank. I was working at a facility where we had, 6,000 gallons of corals. So we're buying, fertilizer bags of potassium nitrate. It was, I'm sure I'm on a list somewhere. Yeah.
I know. There's been a few things where I think I had to like sign something to buy like these fertilizers for my aquarium. Like that's ridiculous, but gotta do what you gotta do. Yeah. Desperate times. Clean reefer. Do you see an increase in shipping rates? Has since pandemic times with everything going up, has it been a tricky one?
It's leveled out. During immediate post-COVID, it was high. And I had, the government here wasn't like, oh yeah, we'll give you a COVID reprieve. So we had to pay all our way through that. Paid our staff because there's no unemployment here. So we paid our staff through COVID. It was a real hard pill to swallow. And so post-COVID, the rates were crazy high. And so customers were pretty scared to buy. So it was a tough pit to climb out of. They're back down to normal, but historically, like when the business was built here, rates were 1/10, even adjusted for inflation. Rates were 1/10 of what they are today. So it was like, yeah, we'll fly live rock, we'll fly anything, like we'll ship, doesn't matter, like we'll ship anything. It can't be that now. It has to be a lot more artisanal and a lot more selective of what we ship.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. So when you are, I guess, cherry picking stuff, are you just going off the demand? What are wholesalers asking for? Do they ask you for stuff, or are you like, here's what we have, you pick?
Yeah, so it's a compromise of both. So if I let the customer dictate what I selected, I would have been out of business a long time ago. Yeah. It's just not possible. It's just not, because I've even got customers like, we'll pay you again 10 times as much, just send me only cherries. And it's like, well, I can't run a business that way. I can't. That's just not. There might be a business model I can set up if we shutter and change, but with the existing agreements in place and staffing and people that are beholden to you, like people's lives are. I'm a business owner. I'm a boss. I've got people's lives that I'm responsible for. So I can't just shut the door and change. But at the same time, customer feedback. You have to respect customer feedback, because if they're not happy, if they're not making money, they're not buying. It's a pretty, one and done thing. So I have had customers go like, whoa, you sent me too much of this coral. Chalice is a good example. And then the next week they're like, hey, can you send me some more chalice? It really sold. It was a lot better than we thought it was. Yeah. So, I mean, it's happened. It's definitely happened. It's also happened where, Deepwater Acropora, that they were like, yeah, it never sells. And I'm like, yeah, I sent you really good stuff. And, 2 weeks later, they're like, it's amazing. Send me more. Yeah. So to some degree, trust has to get built. The old school way of doing, I've got a stock list of what I've collected is simply, this is the corals that I sent guys who don't know corals out collecting. And it's sitting in my raceways. Half of it's going to get thrown out and dead, and only half of it you actually want. It's a sort of a grocery store supply chain model that I don't like. And I think that it's wasteful. And I think that it's wasteful to the corals, wasteful to the lives of the animals, and it's wasteful to the business. And it means that the corals that I'm pulling for you, the corals that you're buying, are already a week out of the water, or a couple days, before I can get them on a price list and trimmed and ready for sale. So what I do is I have a good long conversation with my customer, see what they want, and then target collection trips to get exactly that. Now, it's like, if, I don't know, let's skew this in a weird way. I'm a hunter for a meat market or something. I don't know. I'm going out and getting deers, and I'm a hunter, right? Like, I get my gun and I go in the forest and go hunt. I'm going weird with this analogy, but like, there's no guarantee of how many deers I'm going to find, how many squirrels I'm going to find if we eat squirrels now, and how many bears or whatever. Like I can say what I predict and what I tend to see, but after I come back, like, this is what I got.
Hey,
And
we got
so that's
rabbits.
what we
Yep.
that's what we fill.
Makes
Yeah.
sense.
Thanks. So that's
Yep.
what we fill. And so far, the customers don't love it at first, and then they're like, "Yeah, you really knocked it out of the park. You sent really good stuff."
Hmm.
So it's it means that they're getting a much shorter supply chain, and it means that they're getting some really amazing corals.
Hmm.
Versus the I've got 5 guys out collecting 5 days a week, and you get what you get, or you get a
Yep.
price list. It's what it is. I know that to some degree our customers want photographs, and they want what you would have to look at is that these customers have built their business based upon their eye and their selecting.
Hmm.
And so they've come to trust their eye and
Yep.
their ability to pick a good coral from the rough. And so if you take that away from them, they feel like, well, then what is my business? Like, then
Yeah.
where does my secret sauce get mixed in the soup? And so you have to sort of let them get some of that. But
Hmm.
if I let my customers cherry pick me, I would not have an existing business.
Yeah.
They would
That
be
makes
happy.
sense.
They'd get their, 10 amazing corals, and I'd be out of business. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a give and a take. So it's very much changed, because I mean, when I was starting off in this business, you wake up at 5:30 in the morning, you go to the wholesaler, and you cherry pick the wholesaler, because the wholesaler doesn't know what they have.
Yeah.
So quickly with the internet, the wholesalers got more savvy, and because the wholesalers got more savvy, the exporters like me got a
Hmm.
lot more savvy. And so a lot of those old school guys are still trying to keep the old business model. It's like,
Doesn't work
I
anymore.
can't, I can't,
Yeah.
send you a Blastomusa colony at $10 like we used to. It just doesn't work.
No,
So
that makes
yeah,
sense. Okay, one more question here. You kind of answered this already with
sure.
the prior example, but he goes, has he ever went out and seen something when he went back and regretted it, that it wasn't there again, or you wish you went back and got it? Is that it? Does that happen
Yes.
very often?
Not very often, but it has.
Hmm.
Also, there was the first 5 years of my business here, I was alone.
Yeah.
So I could be like, cool, mental note, that's there. I don't have the customer for it, but
Hmm.
if someone asks, that's there. Now, my I'm not throwing shade, I'll be nebulous about it enough. My manager got poached. And
Hmm.
so the guy that sort of knew a lot of my spots works for someone else now. And
Yeah.
so a lot of those spots are not private anymore. And so I
Tricky.
had to change and adapt and develop. And limitations make for a better business anyways. So no bad feelings there.
Hmm.
But it does mean that those spots are no longer private. And I've seen, because their business model is more clear cut, just take
Hmm.
everything from the forest and deal with it later. It means that a lot of those spots are not
Hmm.
thriving, or
That's
not
too bad.
filled with the corals that I knew I could come back for. So
Yep.
where I used to take a couple pieces, I'll come back to a couple more pieces later. Um, I have to be a little more aggressive, which I don't love. I really
Hmm.
don't like that,
Yep.
but it's just a reality of business. Of if I don't step it up, then I won't be here next year to keep the employees that I've got and to keep the business I've got. So yeah, I've had to be a little more aggressive than my natural inclinations were.
Yep.
Um, and that's fine.
You need a
So
Tim's
yeah.
Reef so you can start regrowing out your cherry picks.
Right. But because land ownership is tough here, which is
Yeah.
again the beautiful thing about the sovereignty. But if I set up a farmer, it has to be in a place where I know that those corals are going to be mine.
Yep.
Or if I invest the time and the money and the training, then I have to
Hmm.
know that I'm not basically selling corals to my competitor. It changed things. It was I got away for 5 years. I had exclusivity here, and now I don't. And it's natural. It changes the business. No one in Australia has an exclusivity, and they're doing fine.
Hmm.
Indonesia has, I don't know how many license holder. At one point, it was like 100 guys in the business. So
Yep.
and they're doing fine.
Good
So
chunk.
yeah.
That's fair. Okay. Another one in the chat. Wait, Devin, does he import to anyone, like to Chris or anyone that you might have had as a guest? ACI, since they're on as well. Is there
Yeah,
anyone?
we just did an
There you
export
go.
to Chris. We just did an export to Chris, and he
Yep.
was gracious enough to throw us a lot of attention, to Solomon Corals.
Hmm.
Um, you got to have Eric Camano on. Eric Camano has
Yep.
amazing stories about being in this industry, starting off as a hobbyist.
Hmm.
He's one of the guys who started as a hobbyist and organically grew his business to a specialized coral vendor. And I'm not familiar with the catalog. I hope you have him on if you haven't. He's
I don't
got
think I
great
have,
stories.
but remind me later
So
with
for
his
him,
name and I'll reach out.
yeah, please do. Yeah. So he's a gentleman that I love doing business with, because he's a coral nerd. He
Hmm.
gets excited about these corals. So yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, it's addicting. It's the love of the coral for sure. Yeah, if there's any last minute
Yeah.
questions, let me know. I will wrap it up soon. I don't want to keep you all day. Don't want to use up all the island data, but I definitely appreciate you coming on today, Tim. It's been awesome. And I did link, the Instagram, your guys' Facebook as well in the descriptions if anyone wants to dig in
Thank
more
you.
of some of the pretty stuff
Thank you.
below. Yeah, if there's anything else you want me to add to it later, I'll add that as well. But I think I put your Instagram and Facebook in the description.
Sure. I guess next time we have this talk, you and I will get to banter about your collecting gems experience in the Solomons. I'm really throwing a pitch here, right?
I would love to join you one day for that. That'd be awesome. All right, that's an open invitation.
Clear time. I mean, we've got space on the boat.
Beautiful. All right, let's make it happen one day. That'd be a blast. All right, definitely appreciate you coming on today, Tim. Much appreciated. For everyone who's watching the replay, definitely check out PM Purple Monster Corals. They've got some awesome stuff and really cool business you're building out there, and it's such a beautiful place. So it's really awesome.
Thank you.
Awesome. All right, guys. As always, you enjoyed it, hit that like button. Check out the links in the description. You're new, make sure you subscribe, and we'll catch you guys in the next live stream.
Bye.